It's pretty easy to make your music sound loud and crappy, but this video is going to show you how to do it and make your music sound good. I'm going to teach you how to mix your music to maximize its loudness potential. This is going to give your songs the opportunity to be as loud as your references, if not louder, and still sound awesome. It's a longer video, but I promise there are so many golden nuggets of wisdom here. This is literally everything you need to know to make your music sound awesome. And if you go through this video and you still need a little bit extra help, I have a free downloadable cheat sheet in the description that has my favorite go-to starting positions for EQ and compression for all the elements in a rock or metal song. I think you're gonna find that super valuable. So how do we achieve super loud sounding songs? Well, there are 3 things that you need to get exactly right. The first is to focus on getting the right balance. The one element that is first out of balance is going to be what limits our maximum volume potential for our song. The second thing that we have to get right after getting that balance dialed in is to identify and remove harshness. Because as songs get louder and louder, details tend to become louder as well. And really quickly, you're going to end up with a bright and harsh sounding song. Finally, the third thing we need to do is identify overlapping and muddy frequencies and remove them from all elements in our songs so we can build space for everything to live peacefully together. So let's go through the entire process so that we can maximize the loudness during mastering. The song we're using is by a band called Demoralized. This is called The Beginning. I have links to their music in the description if you want to check them out. But the first thing we want to do is to listen to the song and see if anything sounds out of balance. Is there an element that is louder than it needs to be? Is something too quiet? We need to identify that and make those level adjustments now before we move on. First thing that I'm hearing is the drums, the cymbals especially sound pretty loud, and the bass guitar probably is a little bit overwhelming. The kick drum has a ton of sub energy that we're gonna have to worry about, but that's not something we want to address at this point. So let's just go and quickly adjust the cymbals. Yeah, you hear in the hi-hats, right? It's this constant sizzle. It's so let's find what boss or what track that is and we'll lower it. So I actually think it's in the room track. So let's lower these drum rooms right now. Much better. All right, let's roll down the volume of the bass a tiny bit. Sounds like this. Just those few things made the vocals come out to the front of the mix. It's crazy how much just getting the balance right at these early stages really helps. Now, this song has already been rough mixed, okay? So there's a lot of things that I did that I don't have time to cover in this video about controlling the dynamics so that the elements themselves kind of stay in their places throughout the song. If you find yourself having to always raise and lower the volume of a certain element, there's a pretty good chance that you probably need to compress that a little bit more to control it in the mix. You don't want to get in a habit of just doing constant volume automation. All right, so we're ready for the second step, which is to go in and remove harshness out of the individual elements. Now, for this process, what I find is most helpful is to actually go in and very quickly solo each element, do some very quick EQing just to try to find where the harshest frequencies are, then pull a little bit out, and then get out of solo so we can hear what it's doing to the overall mix. Just because something sounds harsh when it's in solo doesn't mean it's the best thing for the overall mix. And this is something that a lot of people mess up when they're learning to mix in the beginning. But it's a really good way for us to identify where the harshest regions are for these different elements and get rid of that. So it's going to add more room for all the elements to live. Let's start with the drums. So for the snare drum, I usually like to use channel strip for this. The SSL E channel just has really good, nice sounding curves for the snare drum, and it just sounds good really quickly. So I'm just going to use this on my snare drum bus. Okay, two things I'm identifying right away. One is that it doesn't have enough snap or power. I'm just going to boost this up right around 8K. Okay, that's going to bring out the snares, give it a little bit more attack. And I always like to have a big punchy bottom end to the snare drum. It helps to cut on smaller speakers. That's usually around 200 hertz. So if we just set this up to around 200, just dial this in. So you can hear it. That's like all of the body and power of the snare drum. And if it doesn't have that, it just feels kind of weak and flimsy. Perfect. So not really a lot of harshness there. Let's listen to the kick drum. So there is a little bit of cymbal bleed in this kick drum track. So what I will do is, again, I'm going to use an SSL E channel strip by Waves. And I want to make sure that I have the expander on, because what that's going to do is get rid of that cymbal bleed, that like sizzly, hissy stuff, when the kick drum is not present. Okay, so when the kick drum hits, it's going to allow that to come through, but then it's going to gate it out, right? It's going to cut it out of the mix right away so that our drums stay clean and don't have that weird sizzle. Because if we start mastering this really aggressively, all those low frequency sizzles are going to come up to the top of the mix, and it's going to start sounding cloudy and muddy and harsh. Now, the way this works is that we adjust our threshold settings so that anytime the kick drum hit exceeds our threshold, it's going to let this signal come through, okay? So it's going to let the kick drum come through. If we set this too high and the kick drum signal doesn't ever break the threshold, it's going to mute our kick drum, okay? So you have to make sure that it's low enough that every single kick drum hit in this entire song is going to cross that threshold and allow this gate to open up, okay? That way we're cleaning up the kick drum and then making sure we don't lose any of those kick drum hits. Okay, like that sounds good to me. We can also adjust how quickly we let the sound go back to 0 by adjusting the release here. So really short release, you can hear it. It's cutting out the frequencies faster, but it doesn't sound as natural, right? It sounds kind of pumpy or weird. So I like to put a little bit of a release on it just to kind of smooth that tail out. And then now if we get rid of this is what it sounds like. The cymbals and all the room sound gets muted when the kick drum is not hitting. Okay, so that's just going to help clean it up a little bit. You can also go in and just literally delete out all the space in between everything and then fade everything. I find that that's a lot of effort, and sometimes it just makes things sound unnatural when I can use a gate like that and just clean everything up and keep it nice and tidy. So that's a great way to get rid of harshness that might be in the bleed of a kick drum. Toms, I've gone ahead and deleted everything that wasn't a tom hit. That is very, very important on drums so that you don't have a ton of drum bleed on all the tracks, right? Look at all the bleed in this track. Take the time to go through and delete all of the non-tom hits on all your tom tracks, and it's going to really, really add a lot of clarity to your mix, and that gets rid of a ton of drum harshness. Here are the cymbals. Let's see what we're working with. I would say this is almost more muddy than anything. So let's save the cymbals for the next part where we talk about how to identify and get rid of the mud. All right, what about the drum rooms? So this is a combination of muddiness and harshness. So let's go in and clean up those harsh frequencies. Let me show you how to do that. So for drum rooms, I really don't like having a lot of the really high frequencies in there. So I'm going to start just with a high shelf. So we're just going to find a spot where it sounds like the drums are in maybe another room from us. Something like that. The reason we're doing all this is because usually drum rooms get compressed a lot because you can bring out a sense of space in the drum kit doing it that way. A lot of times you want to go through and just clear out a ton of that top end, because otherwise your drums will get super, super bright and your cymbals will get too loud in the mix. Okay, the next thing that I suggest doing is just grabbing a normal bell filter here and just kind of sweeping through and find a region in the drum rooms where the cymbals just kind of have an annoying sound to them. You know, something like that. And let's just check to see if there's any other spots. So this whole region to me sounds really metallic and ringy. So I'm just going to kind of broaden that EQ out a little bit. Like that. That. And then just kind of bounce this up and down until I find a spot where it feels like it tamed those really ringy frequencies. Now, when we go in on the next step and clean up the mud, you'll hear how much this is going to help us. Okay, so without the EQ, sounds like this. Right, again, the goal is to make this kind of sound like there's drums in the room next door. All right, what about bass guitar? Let's check this out. Let's clean up the harshness in this instrument. So at first pass, it kind of sounds really good, right? Like, I don't know if there's too much we want to do to this. So what I'll do is I'll just take an EQ, sharpen the Q, or make the Q a little bit higher. Okay, it's going to get a little bit more narrow. And we just want to see if we can identify anything that really makes it jump out to our ears. So I think like right here, this sizzle and this hiss isn't really needed in the bass guitar, right? You don't miss that, right? So only do this once or twice. Okay, don't have 25 different EQ notches to clean out every weird frequency. It just sounds really unnatural that way. Okay, we just want to find the things that really, really jump out and can be annoying, especially if this gets turned up. Now, a little bit of this I want to remove, but we don't want to do too much because these frequencies are important so you can hear a bass on a smaller speaker. Cool. You know, just something like that. That's it. And then we'll clean up the mud again in the next step. All right, moving on to guitars. So again, you notice that I'm not spending too much time doing this, right? Because if you're in solo doing stuff, you lose perspective over the sound of the entire song. Okay, so we want to make absolutely sure that we're not just sitting in solo the whole time. All right, so let's listen for harshness in this guitar. This kind of has this like scratchiness to it that I don't like, right on 5.5K. Careful again here because this is a spot where it can make the guitars feel really wide. So if you cut too much of this out, you kind of feel like you bring in the guitars closer to the center of the mix. But if you clean that up, it really adds a nice clarity to the guitar so you can get it nice and loud and not have it just feel like your ears are bleeding. And like 3.3K right here, this is sounding kind of harsh to me. I'm just going to take a chunk out. And you can really hear it on these chords, right? So we go back and listen without EQ. It just gets the sizzle out of the mix, giving those cymbals more room to live, giving the vocals breath, the airiness, more room to live. And it cleans up all the harshness. And because these guitars are exactly the same, I'm just going to copy and paste this EQ to the right guitar. All right, let's go to the vocals. Let's hear what they sound like, if they need to be adjusted at all.
Look into his eyes.
There's a little bit of this like 2K thing. The 2K is like a nasally, like, nyah, like, nyah. That kind of sound. Let's clean that up.
Eyes are hellish fire.
Oh, that right there.
I feel he shall.
You just want take a little bit of that out. Taking too much of this out, you'll lose the clarity of the voice. So leave a little bit in, but we definitely want to pull a little bit of that out because that'll jump out of the mix when we're mastering and trying to get the level really loud.
Lost in the vortex of my destiny.
There's something up here too, around 3, 4K.
What fate will bring.
Oh, yeah, that. Let's pull a little of that out. All right, so without the EQ.
Ready to die, I hear the cry. The sky turns black. Into his eyes, a hellish fire.
So it's subtle, but there is this like easing of the voice and the harshness there that I really, really appreciate. Especially if you were to crank this at loud volumes, those frequencies are going to come back to haunt you if you don't get rid of that. Okay, finally, let's listen to an orchestra. See if there's any really annoying things we want to get rid of from there. Again, we have a little bit of this build up around like 2 or 4K. I can hear it. It just like puts pressure right on your forehead when you listen to it. Right in here, right there, 2.4K. You can almost feel like it's kind of getting wider when we remove that, right? It's punching a hole for the vocals to live so that the instrumental here is not on top of the vocalist. And maybe what we can do is roll off a little of this really top-end sizzly stuff. Right? That's not really adding much to the feel of the orchestra. Now, if this was like EDM or something like that, these frequencies are usually really hyped in that style of music. But for something like this, we don't miss these frequencies if we cut those out. Awesome. All right, let's hear what it sounds like now after we've cleaned up the harshness from the beginning.
Light blinds my eyes. My head is heavy, my senses dull.
So it sounds a lot smoother, but what also sounds like is it's gotten muddier, right? So step 2 is complete. That is how you go through and systematically remove all the harshness out of like a dense rock or metal song. So that leads us to the third step, which is to go in, find the mud, and let's eliminate it, okay? It's gonna make this whole mix open up and then gel so much nicer together. Let's start with the drums. What's critically important for the drums to maximize the volume is to make sure that we don't have too much low sub energy in this mix. So that means our kick drums, our toms, we need to make sure that there's not a ton of rumble in there. So a good approach to that is to add a high pass filter. We're going to get rid of all the stuff that's like subsonic and just rumbly. That doesn't really add a lot to the song. But we want to keep some of the punch and power that's there. So I'll leave that up to you and your ears to find out where that sweet spot is. But let me just show you what I would do. Now, I put my high-pass filters on my drum bus instead of the individual instruments, and that's just because it helps to reduce any phase issues. I don't have time in this video to go into all that stuff, but if you put a lot of high-pass filters on every channel, try just putting it once on the group bus and see if you like how it sounds. All right, so let's clean up the low-frequency rumble. So here's just the drums. I like to go too far with the high pass filter, okay? So go where you know it's way too high, like 300 hertz, right? Drums are totally hollow, and work your way backwards. So right around here, I think is a good spot. Maybe we could go a little bit lower, but this is the point now where we're getting enough of the sub bloom off of that kick drum where it feels like a really, really big, massive, powerful kick drum. Much higher than this, it's missing that sub energy. So if you can't hear what's happening in the sub region, maybe try listening on headphones. That really helps to kind of fix any sub frequency phase problems in your listening position in your studio and let you dial this in really, really well. So give that a shot if you can't hear what's going on with this. Now let's go into the individual elements and see what we can do to clear out space, okay? So let's start with the snare drum. I like to remove some of the low frequencies that are below the fundamental of the snare. You can identify where the fundamental is by looking for the big little hump here, right? The big peak that's in the snare spectrum. What I will do is just put on like a low shelf, something with a resonance filter on it, and just align this with that fundamental, okay? Like that. So now what we're doing is kind of giving it a little bit of a increase or a little bit more body or punch before we scoop out all this low energy. And that helps to kind of balance us removing all the subsonic stuff and keeping the snare sounding powerful. And that's pretty good. There's a little bit of this ring that may or may not be good, but let's just roll some of that off and see if that helps. Yeah, I like that. It just kind of helps to tighten up the snare drum a little bit. Sometimes it's nice to have a ringy snare, but in this case, I like it like this. All right, so that snare is sounding good. We don't have to do like anything else. Let's listen to the kick drum. We got some work to do here. First thing is that it's sounding like it's distorting, right? So it's too loud. It got too loud on us. So let's turn it down. There we go. Now it's starting to sound muddy. So let's open up an EQ and let's start cleaning this thing up. Around 180, 200 hertz. I think kick drums kind of sound too pillowy for me, but that's my own stylistic interpretation of the music. Sometimes it's nice to have these frequencies again because it'll help you hear the kick drum on smaller speakers. So if you do have smaller speakers or headphones, or you can check this on a phone, it's a good idea to help you identify what frequencies are important for small speakers and then what's important for bigger ones for like subwoofers and stuff. But in my experience, around 200 hertz in a kick drum usually can be pulled out a little bit, and it'll help focus the kick drum. Right? Pillowy. A lot of clarity here, okay? So around 180 sounds pretty good to me. Let's see if there's anything hiding up here. Not really. So let's just leave that alone. I think we're probably pretty good. Just for a quick sanity check, let's hear the drums in the context of the entire song. So playing back, we want to make sure that we didn't lose our snare drum in the mix now that we've kind of carved out some of the mud and got rid of the harshness. Same with the kick drum. Here we go. Cool. That's sounding pretty good to me. We might want to bring up the snare drum a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. Awesome. Okay. Sounding good. Let's listen to these toms. Ugh. Needs some work. So here's the EQ I had before I muted it. So I really like to get some of the air out of the toms. I used to always come in here and boost this up a ton to add like presence, but I find that it sounds really synthetic. So I like to cut the really high end of the toms. Okay, and it also cleans up some of that room sound, which I'm not really digging. Toms always sound bad, in my opinion, between 200 and 800 hertz. So we want to take a ton of that frequency stuff out of the mix, because that is just eating up space where the guitars live, the bass lives, vocals live there, drums, every instrument lives there. And the toms really don't drive or make a song. So we can sacrifice a little bit more frequencies out of the toms for that spot to enable those other elements to shine. Yeah, that sounds like cardboard. It sounds like you made your toms out of cardboard. Get rid of that. That's 12 dB. You'll read in a lot of books, it's like, oh, never take out more than like 3 dB or you did it wrong. Not true. You can do as much as you want. I've taken 24 dB out of stuff. I've taken 60 dB out of stuff. But if you're doing more than like 6 or 8, make sure that you know why you're doing it and you're not just doing it. Cool. Let's try to take some more out of this. Yep. So I like to pull some tom just above the snare drum fundamental, like around 220-ish hertz. Again, it's just to add a little bit more space between the snare drum and the toms so that there's a lot of clarity there. Beautiful, like that. Now I always will pull some 3 to 5K out of the toms where the stick hits the head of the tom, because it has this like sharp, nasty sound to it. Listen. That. I I just don't like that. I don't think it ever sounds good in a mix. So I'm cutting a bunch of that out. Beautiful. Let's listen to what it sounded like before. Perfect. Cool. Toms are done. All right, cymbals. This is going to be fun. These cymbals are a combination of spot mics that are right on the drum cymbal itself and then also overheads, okay? Typically, with cymbals, at least for me, I don't like to have a lot of low frequency content in my overheads because I think it just confuses the stereo image of the drum kit. The sub information and the power come from the close mic on the shells, and then I like to clean up all that out of the overheads and drum room mics. Otherwise, you just don't have any separation for your other elements. The drums are too big in the mix. So let's start by just scooping out a bunch of this low frequency stuff out of these drum cymbals. Perfect. That sounds good to me. We don't want to get rid of too much. A little bit of the sub stuff is okay. It makes it feel more real. But if we have too much in there, especially when we start getting louder in our songs and we start mastering this really aggressively, it's going to get too much. Let's try to dig out some more of the muddy mid-range frequencies. Terrible. So 350 to 500 hertz is usually a disaster for me in overheads. So I'm just going to take a big chunk out of that. Instant clarity, right? But you might have noticed when we did this move, now the cymbals sound bright, kind of sizzly and harsh. So let's, we might want to pull some of that out too. Yeah, right in here. This is a really ringy, annoying spot. Ugh, clean it up. Awesome. We can make the top end a little bit less harsh. Hang on, let's go in there. Yeah, right there. It's just, that's all the sizzle and like gross stuff. The air is there, but that is all sizzle. Let's get rid of the sizzle and leave the air. Right? Oh. I think that's a great spot. All right, drum rooms. This is going to be fun. I do a lot of damage to some drum rooms when I am mixing. Already, I have a 160 hertz high pass filter filtering out the mud, right? Let's get rid of that top end. Now, when you get rid of all this top end and the sub stuff, now you're listening to like the mid-range of these drum rooms. That is when you're going to be able to identify the muddy frequencies in this group of tracks. Right? It's much more obvious that there's something wrong right here. So let's get rid of that. And then we still have a lot of harshness, man. We got to come in here and really remove some more frequencies up here. So let's clean some of that up. And then there's still too much sub energy in these rooms. Let's go and take a shelf now and just try to roll off some of that, the bass. That just tightens everything up. We have the length from those direct mics. We don't need really long or slow, deep frequencies in this room track. So let's play all the drums back to make sure it still sounds like a real drum kit. What you'll probably notice is that the drums have some more muddy frequencies in them that I can now hear because I'm playing everything in context. So let's go back to the drum cymbals. We need to adjust some of the low mid cut here to get rid of the muddiness. So I might broaden this one out. Now I'm gonna move this around when everything's playing so you can really find that frequency. It's on the right side. That's kind of muddy. It's this. There we go. Perfect. Now, if we didn't play everything back, we probably wouldn't have heard that. So now that drums are done, let's leave them playing when we make all the decisions moving on, okay? This is gonna help make sure that when we dial in our last few cuts and our EQ moves, that we don't lose perspective of the song as a whole, okay? We want all these pieces to fit together, and the only way to make sure that they fit together is to have them playing while we're EQing. Okay, so let's listen to the bass. We wanna make sure the bass guitar is not fighting the snare drum, it's not fighting the kick drum. Here we go. Let's add in a little bit more space for that kick drum to live in this bass guitar. Take an EQ and boost it, move it around, find the spot where it's hard to hear that kick drum, and then cut there. That's gonna build in space for the kick drum to live. So I think right around 120 is gonna add a nice little spot for that kick drum. Yep. Sounding good. I think that's done. Let's check out the guitars now. Let's add those in. All right, there's something going on around 200 hertz. I find that guitars often fight the snare drum, and if I can't hear or feel the snare drum, it's probably because the guitars are in the way. Right? Like, there's no power to the snare drum right now. And it's probably because the guitars have all this low mid-range. Now, do you miss that frequency that I just cut out of the guitars? Probably not. Okay, let's also make another cut because I think we can clean up the guitars a little bit more. Like this stuff, that makes guitars feel really narrow and small. So let's just do a pretty broad cut there and see how it pushes the guitars a little bit deeper and wider into our mix. Awesome. That's sounding killer to me. There's a little bit of high sizzle that I'm not digging, so let's try to carve that out. Where is that? I think it's like right in here. Let's get rid of some of that. We can open up this low pass filter a little bit more. It'll add a little bit more air. Those are done. Let's bring the vocals in. Now, this is going to be the fun part because a lot of times the vocals are the thing that usually is in the way of everything. So now when we bring the vocals in, let's make sure that there's room for them to live. Otherwise, we're going to have to go back to the instruments and then carve out more space for the vocals. And the reason we carve out space for the vocals is because the vocals tend to be the most important thing in the song. If the guitars are more important than bass, then you should carve the frequencies out of the bass instead of the guitar. Figure out what you think is the most important, establish some hierarchy, and then go from there. And sometimes you're gonna have to adjust the level as you go through and get rid of the mud or get rid of the harshness, because without all that stuff in the way, the other elements kind of rise to the top of the mix.
Into his eyes, a hell is fire. I feel he shall lie. Lost in the vortex.
Right, listen how loud the background vocals are now. So we have to bring those down. So just go to harmony.
True identity.
So the vocals do feel like a little bit buried. So I think we need to do a little bit more cleanup on the orchestra. I feel like the orchestra is getting in the way of the vocal.
Remember my true identity.
Oh yeah, that's the issue. Check this out. Watch how hard it is to hear the vocal when I boost this.
My head is heavy, my senses dull.
Right? That means that all these frequencies from all these different orchestral elements directly on top of the vocal, we have no clarity there. So let's do a nice cut to really clean that up.
Faded visions of my memories.
Oh, so much better.
Ready to die, I hear the cry.
There you go. Now, all the instruments have their own space in the mix, and the song is set up to be destroyed by a limiter and still sound awesome. In fact, let's just do that. Let's see how loud we can make this song sound now that I've gone through and made room for all the elements to live in the song. And you'll see for yourself how good it can sound and how loud it can sound. Okay, here we go. So things are starting to really break up here. Let me set this to a normal output level. Watch your ears. It's gonna get loud. Look at that loudness, -4. Did it sound terrible? No, it didn't. It sounded pretty good. That, my friends, is one of the secrets to get your music exceptionally loud. Now that we've built all this space into our songs, when we go to master our music using clippers, limiters, and saturators, this song will respond a lot better. You're gonna be able to get out way more volume out of your song without it sounding distorted or harsh. So after watching this video, go back to one of your songs you're struggling with some fresh ears and ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, is anything out of balance in terms of level? Fix that issue if you have any. Number 2, ask yourself if anything sounds harsh in your mix. Is there anything that catches your ear? Anything that's ringing? Grab an EQ and try to fix those things. And the third and final question you should ask yourself is if there are any elements that sound like they're on top of each other in the mix. That usually means we need to build more space for all those elements, usually by cutting some mid-range frequencies of less important elements. At least that typically works for me. So if you want to go a little bit deeper and learn all of my secrets for squeezing out even more loudness or adding even more width to your songs, I have a coupon code in the description for my complete home studio mastering course. This is going to give you all of my secrets for maximizing loudness out of your tracks, as well as all of the unique challenges that all of us face in home studios when we're trying to finalize our music and get it uploaded for distribution. I've already helped hundreds of home studio owners get their music sounding pro, so you know that this system works. If you have a release coming up, definitely check that out because I think that's going to be a game changer for you. My name is Bobby Balo. I'm the mixing and mastering engineer at Rayton Productions, and I'll see you in another video.